Kelsey Grammer spent years keeping quiet about what really happened behind the bar on Cheers, and when he finally spoke, the name that came up wasn't the one anyone expected. For over a decade, that Boston bar was television's most beloved living room, a place where people didn't just go to watch comedy, but to feel something warm and recognizable. What the audience never saw was the version of that set that existed when the cameras stopped rolling. The grief, the power plays, the quiet campaigns to have a cast member removed, and the personal disasters that kept accumulating even as the show kept collecting Emmy Awards. What Grammer revealed didn't just reframe how people see Cheers. It reopened a conversation about one of the most decorated sitcoms in television history, and the person at the center of it wasn't who anyone suspected. NBC premiered Cheers in September of 1982, and from the outside, the concept looked almost too simple to survive. A neighborhood bar in Boston, a handful of regulars, and a group of characters who never seemed to go anywhere or accomplish much. The famous theme song promised audiences that everybody knows your name, and in that single line, the show had already delivered something television rarely managed, the feeling of genuinely belonging somewhere. At the heart of it all was Sam Malone, a former baseball pitcher turned bartender played by Ted Danson, a man who was charming and confident and almost always more interested in romance than anything resembling actual responsibility. Opposite him stood Diane Chambers, the character Shelley Long inhabited with a kind of intellectual self-regard that clashed constantly and hilariously with the bar she'd landed in. Their push-and-pull dynamic gave the early seasons their backbone, and the tension between them drove storylines for years. Rhea Perlman's Carla Tortelli treated insults like a second language, a sharp-tongued waitress with an endless supply of children and a sharper supply of comebacks. Nicholas Colasanto brought a gentle, slow-burning warmth to Coach Ernie Pantuso that grounded the louder personalities around him. Then there were the bar's two most iconic regulars, George Wendt's Norm Peterson, a perpetually unemployed accountant with a dedicated relationship to his bar stool, and John Ratzenberger's Cliff Clavin, a postal worker whose trivia habit made him the easiest target in the room. The chemistry between this group was genuine, and audiences felt it even when the Nielsen ratings didn't reflect it. That first season, Cheers ranked 77th out of 100 shows, the kind of number that typically signals a quiet cancellation and a network moving on. NBC made a decision that seemed risky at the time and kept the show alive anyway, and that gamble paid off in a way few people in the industry saw coming. Word of mouth built slowly, critical praise mounted, and by the mid-1980s, Cheers had climbed from near cancellation to one of the most powerful properties on American television. Across 11 seasons, the show earned 117 Emmy nominations and walked away with 28 of them, including 4 wins for Outstanding Comedy Series. The character who shifted everything arrived in the third season, in 1984. His name was Dr. Frasier Crane, and the actor playing him was a then relatively unknown stage performer named Kelsey Grammer. Frasier was built as a temporary fix, a Harvard-educated psychiatrist with a love of opera and a well-worn habit of assuming he was the most intelligent person in any room. He was supposed to last a few episodes, introduced as Diane's new love interest during another of her recurring breaks from Sam. Nobody, including the producers, had drawn up any long-term plans for him, and then something happened that surprised everyone. Audiences responded to Grammer in ways the writers hadn't anticipated, not because Frasier was likable in any conventional sense, but because beneath the pomposity and the endless psychological overanalysis was a man who desperately wanted to belong somewhere and kept failing at it in ways that were genuinely, precisely funny. His comic potential became obvious the moment he was placed next to someone like Carla, who had no patience for pretension and no hesitation about announcing it. His role expanded, his storylines deepened, and what had been introduced as a short-term plot device became as central to Cheers as the bar itself. That kind of transformation said everything about what Grammer brought to the role, a layered vulnerability that sitcoms in the 1980s rarely extended to their supporting characters. What audiences never saw was the weight Grammer carried through all of it. In 1975, when he was 20 years old and just beginning his acting career, his sister Karen died at 18, and the loss was one he rarely discussed publicly during the Cheers years, but never fully moved past. As his profile rose and the paychecks increased, he leaned on alcohol and substances in ways that began to spiral beyond control. Rehearsals got missed, and some mornings he arrived on set still recovering from the night before. The production team managed quietly around the edges of it for a while, but the warning signs were visible to anyone paying attention. Then came 1990, and there was no more quiet management. Grammer was arrested for driving under the influence and possession of a controlled substance. The headlines came immediately, and he spent 30 days in jail. What followed wasn't a public spectacle from the cast. The Cheers team offered support, some of it private and compassionate, some delivered with a clear expectation of change. Grammer later credited them with keeping him grounded through it, though genuine recovery would take years beyond that moment. The cast had already absorbed a loss of a completely different kind. Nicholas Colasanto, the man behind Coach Ernie Pantuso, had been quietly living with heart disease for years, while continuing to show up on set with the same warmth that made his character beloved. In early 1985, he died at the age of 61, and for many on the cast, particularly the younger members, he had been a father figure in the truest sense of the phrase. The producers chose not to recast the Coach character at all, letting the bar feel his absence the same way the people in it did. A new character followed the next season, Woody Boyd, played by a then-unknown Woody Harrelson, young and naive and from a small town in Indiana, carrying an energy entirely different from Colasanto's, but one that somehow found its own footing. As a permanent tribute, the photo of the Apache warrior Geronimo that Colasanto had kept in his dressing room for good luck was placed on the main set and left there. In 1987, another significant change arrived when Kirstie Alley joined the show as Rebecca Howe, the bar's new manager, a character who was image-conscious and deeply insecure in ways that gave the writers entirely new territory to work with. Her arrival kept the ratings from slipping after a cast change that had every reason to destabilize everything. Shelley Long's exit from Cheers after 5 seasons stunned viewers and industry insiders in equal measure. The show was performing well. The critical response was strong, and walking away from a lead role in one of television's most successful comedies was not a move most actresses made voluntarily. Long said publicly that she left to pursue a film career, wanting opportunities that television couldn't offer her. The decision was hers, and she stood by it. But the behind-the-scenes reality of her time on the show had already become something the cast and crew discussed privately, in ways that never quite reached the public. Long had built a reputation for approaching her role with an intensity that created friction at every level of production. Writers described her as someone who didn't accept scripts as written, who regularly pushed for rewrites and changes to scenes she objected to, and whose process, while rooted in genuine passion for her character, made the job harder for almost everyone around her. Ken Levine, one of the show's writers and producers, acknowledged it plainly. She could be obstinate, she could overthink something into exhaustion, and navigating her process was frequently draining. Ted Danson, who shared more scenes with her than anyone, was direct about it too. There were times when simply being in the same room was difficult, but the moment they started working, everything shifted. The conflict that Grammer eventually made public went further than creative disagreements over scripts. In his memoir, Grammer wrote that Long was visibly unhappy when Frasier's character gained popularity and an expanding presence on the show, and that she felt his rising prominence was pulling attention away from her position as lead. He went further, claiming she had actively pushed the producers to write Frasier out of the show entirely. The part that generated the most discussion was Grammer's suggestion that the producers, in direct response to Long's demands, made a deliberate choice to keep Frasier on the show as a way of pushing back against her attempts to control the cast roster. Levine responded to those claims and denied them. His account was that the decision to keep Frasier had nothing to do with Long's opinions, and everything to do with Grammer's performance and the measurable audience response to his character. Levine described Long as strong-willed and exacting, but stopped short of the portrait Grammer painted, insisting that her behavior, exhausting as it could be, never crossed into deliberately undermining a co-star. The two accounts remain in tension with each other, and the conversation has never been cleanly closed. What Long did after leaving tells its own story. Her film career didn't unfold the way she had anticipated, and years later she made guest appearances on Frasier, the spin-off series built around Grammer's character, which meant returning to Diane Chambers alongside the same man she had allegedly tried to remove from the original show. She did it, and she did it more than once, which suggested that whatever the behind-the-scenes reality had been, the professional relationship had found stable enough ground to coexist. Grammer's closest friendship on the Cheers set didn't belong to any of the original cast. It was with Kirstie Alley, the woman who stepped into the show after Long's departure, and brought a completely different kind of energy with her. He described her as someone who made the set feel like a family again, someone whose directness and warmth were constants in a working environment that had seen more than its share of tension. When she died in 2022, Grammer described her as radiant, as someone whose beauty came through everything she did, and the warmth in how he spoke about her made clear the friendship had gone well beyond the professional. His relationships with the rest of the cast, Danson, George Wendt, John Ratzenberger, Rhea Perlman, operated on a different register, professional and respectful, built on the shared discipline of keeping a long-running show functioning at the highest level, but without the same personal depth. Cheers ran for 11 seasons and left behind a television legacy that still holds. The 117 Emmy nominations were not simply a number. They were a record of how consistently the show operated at the top of the medium, even while the people making it were grieving, struggling with addiction, or quietly at war with each other behind closed doors. The sitcom format doesn't usually leave room for that kind of complexity, but Cheers did, and the audience sensed something layered and real without ever fully understanding why. What Grammer finally said out loud years after the show ended confirmed what the people who worked there had always known, that the bar on screen was warm and funny, and full of people who felt like home, and the bar behind the cameras was something else entirely. Both versions were true, and the distance between them was exactly what made this show something people are still talking about decades later.